The town of Millfield was small and quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names. Old oak trees lined the dusty roads, and some families had lived there for more than 100 years. People still sat on their porches in the evenings, sipping sweet tea and sharing stories from way back when. It was a town holding on to its past, for better or worse. 12-year-old Ruthie Carter sat on the wooden steps of her grandfather's farmhouse, watching him push his shovel into the dry earth. Sam Carter was a thin, wiry man with a face full of wrinkles from years spent under the sun. His hands were rough and his back ached, but he still worked the land every day. The same land his father and grandfather had farmed before him. To Ruthie, this land was more than dirt and trees. It was family. It was home. But now, someone wanted to take it away. Judge Walter Langley, a man with silver hair and sharp eyes, stood tall at the front of the town meeting that night. He wore a fancy suit and a smug smile. His family had owned most of the land around Millfield for generations. He liked people to remember that. "This land here," he said, pointing to a map on the board. "It was never officially sold or given away. It belongs to the Langley family. Always has." Sam stood up slowly from his seat. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. "With all due respect, sir, my granddaddy farmed that land. My daddy did too. Your great-granddaddy told them they could keep it for their work." Judge Langley laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was cold and mocking. "You can't grow crops on land you don't own, Mr. Carter. Promises don't mean anything without paper to back them up." Ruthie sat frozen in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap, her face burned with anger, but she said nothing. She wanted to stand up, to tell the judge he was wrong, but what could a girl like her say in a room full of grown men? After the meeting, Sam walked out with his head high, even though his heart was heavy. Ruthie walked beside him, kicking at the dirt with her shoe. "Grandpa," she said softly, "what if he takes it?" Sam looked down at her and gave her a tired smile. "He may have money and power, but we've got truth. And sometimes, that's enough." Ruthie didn't know if that was true, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let their story be forgotten, not without a fight. The next morning, Ruthie sat in her grandmother's old room. Sunlight peeked through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the wooden floor. Dust floated in the air, slow and quiet. She hadn't been in this room much since Grandma passed, but something told her she needed to be there now. A wooden trunk sat under the window, its lid heavy and worn. Ruthie knelt down and opened it. Inside were faded quilts, yellowed papers, and a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon. Her fingers trembled as she pulled them out. The letters were written in neat, careful handwriting. Some were addressed to "My dearest Maybelle," her grandmother. Others had no names, just stories about crops, storms, and people long gone. One caught her eye. It had a date, May 3rd, 1923. She read the words slowly. "The land by the river is yours to tend, always. This I promise for the years of faithful service, and for the blood that binds us." Ruthie's eyes widened. Blood that binds us. What did that mean? She found a photo folded in the back of the letter. In the black and white picture, a serious-looking white man stood beside a young black woman. They weren't smiling, but they stood close, too close for the time the photo was taken. Ruthie's heart thudded. Could this be her great-great-grandmother? And the man, was he a Langley? She raced outside and found her grandfather sitting on the porch, drinking coffee from an old tin cup. "Grandpa," she said, holding out the photo and letter, "who are they?" Sam took the photo in his hands and looked at it for a long time. "That's your great-great-grandma Josephine," he said softly. The man beside her, "That's Henry Langley, Walter Langley's grandfather." But why were they together? Ruthie asked, her voice small. Sam sighed. "Some stories don't get told out loud. Not in towns like this. Henry and Josephine were close. More than folks would have liked back then. He promised her the land. Told her it would stay in our family, no matter what." Ruthie sat beside him, her mind spinning. "So it was ours, even back then." Sam nodded. "They didn't sign papers, but they shook hands. And around here, that used to mean something." Ruthie looked out at the fields stretching toward the river. She could almost see her ancestors walking those same rows, planting seeds with worn hands and tired hope. "I don't want them to take it," she whispered. "They won't," Sam said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You found something real. Maybe that's what we've needed all along. For the first time in days, Ruthie felt a spark, small but strong. There was more to this story. And maybe, just maybe, it could still be told. The courthouse in Millfield stood at the corner of Main Street, like an old watchtower, tall, quiet, and cold. Ruthie had only been inside once for a school field trip, but now everything felt different, serious, heavy. She sat on the wooden bench beside her grandfather, clutching the old letter and photograph they had found in the trunk. Sam Carter sat straight, though his hands were folded tightly in his lap. He wore his best shirt, clean but faded at the collar. Across the room sat Judge Walter Langley in his black robe. He wasn't up high like usual. This time, he was part of the case. A younger judge from another town had been called in to handle it. Still, Walter Langley looked proud, like he already knew he'd win. The courtroom filled with townsfolk, curious and whispering. Many had heard about the land dispute. Most didn't know the whole story. Not yet. Mr. Carter, the visiting judge said kindly. You may speak. Sam stood slowly. My family has farmed that land near the river for close to 100 years. My granddaddy was told it was his to keep. No money was exchanged, no paper signed, but the word was given, and it was trusted. We've worked it, improved it, and lived off it ever since. Walter Langley smirked. That land is owned by the Langley estate. It was never legally transferred. No deed, no sale, no right to it. Sam nodded. We have something better than a deed. He looked at Ruthie, who stood and handed the letter to the bailiff. The judge took a few moments to read it. The room grew quiet. This letter, the judge said slowly, mentions a promise made in 1923. It suggests that the land was given in return for family loyalty. Walter Langley's eyes narrowed. It's just words on paper. Could have been written by anyone. Ruthie stepped forward, heart pounding. Her voice shook but stayed steady. It's signed by Henry Langley, your grandfather, and this picture, she held it up, was taken around the same time. It shows him with my great-great-grandmother, Josephine. Someone in the back of the room gasped. Walter stood, his face red. This is nonsense, old gossip and tricks. That's no proof. Ruthie's teacher, Miss Ellis, stood up from her seat. She had helped Ruthie research everything. Your Honor, she said. I teach local history. The handwriting matches other letters from Henry Langley in our archives. And we found land notes from the church that say Josephine Carter was gifted soil for devotion and loyalty. The judge raised an eyebrow. Church records. Yes, sir, Miss Ellis replied. They kept everything. For a moment, no one spoke. Ruthie could feel the weight in the room shift, just a little. Walter Langley leaned forward. Even if any of that is true, there's still no legal deed. But there's a promise. Sam said, standing again. A man gave his word. We kept ours. We lived honest. We held that land with care. Now you want to take it with a smile and a stamp. The judge looked thoughtful. Sometimes, he said quietly, truth lives longer than paper. Ruthie sat down beside her grandfather, her heart full. They hadn't won yet, but something was changing. People were listening now. Maybe, just maybe, the truth was starting to rise. The days after the courtroom hearing were slow, but something had shifted in the town. People started whispering in stores, at church, and in the school hallways. Ruthie noticed the stares, not mean, just curious. Like folks were seeing her, and her grandfather in a new light. At school, Miss Ellis pulled Ruthie aside after class. I've been doing some more digging, she said, holding up a folder. There's more to this story than we thought. Inside were records from the county archives, old birth certificates, family tree notes, even a few letters from Henry Langley to church leaders. One note stood out most. It was dated June 1924, and it read, Josephine is with child. She says it's mine. I cannot claim it publicly, but I will provide for them quietly. The land will stay in her line. I owe her that. Ruthie stared at the words. They looked shaky and rushed, but they were real. Does this mean I'm related to them? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Miss Ellis nodded. It looks like you and Judge Langley share a great-grandfather. The truth was heavy. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like carrying a stone that had been hidden for 100 years. Back home, Ruthie showed the papers to Sam. He sat in silence for a long time. We always knew, he said at last. Maybe not with proof, but we felt it. That land wasn't a gift. It was a cover. A way to keep quiet, but now we can speak. Ruthie said. We should. The next court date came fast. This time Ruthie wasn't scared. She wore her grandmother's locket and stood tall beside her grandfather. The courtroom was packed again. Judge Langley looked calm, but his eyes twitched when Ruthie walked in with the new folder of papers. The visiting judge called the room to order. Miss Carter, you may speak. Ruthie stepped forward. My great-great-grandmother Josephine had a child with Henry Langley, Judge Langley's grandfather. That child became part of our family line. We found letters, church records, and even a family note where Henry promised to take care of them by giving the land. She paused. We didn't come here to shame anyone. We came to hold on to what's ours, what was always meant to stay in our hands. Judge Langley stood slowly. This is an attack on my family's name. My grandfather had a wife. A white wife. These claims are not proven, and even if they were true, it changes nothing about legal ownership. The judge looked at Ruthie. Do you have proof of relation? Miss Ellis stood. We're willing to do a DNA test. A distant cousin of the Langley family already submitted their records to a genealogy site. If Ruthie and her grandfather match, the courtroom murmured. 3 weeks later the results came in. The DNA was clear. Ruthie and Sam were direct descendants of Henry Langley. The court gathered one last time. Walter Langley was pale, his usual pride missing. The judge read the ruling. Based on the historical documents, oral family traditions, and newly confirmed biological connection, it is clear that this land was promised and passed through informal but meaningful agreements. The court recognizes the Carter family's rightful claim. Sam closed his eyes, letting out a breath that seemed to come from deep inside. Ruthie held his hand. Walter Langley didn't speak. He simply walked out, his head down. People in the room clapped softly, not for victory, but for truth. Outside, the sun shone down on the dirt road. Ruthie looked at the sky. It felt brighter somehow. Her grandfather's voice broke the silence. Truth's a slow traveler, but it always gets there. Ruthie smiled. And now it's home. Spring came early to Millfield that year. The ground softened, the trees turned green again, and the fields near the river seemed to breathe after the long winter. But the biggest change wasn't in the weather, it was in the town itself. Everyone knew the Carter name now, not because of trouble or pity, but because of truth. After the final court ruling, Judge Walter Langley retired quietly. He didn't give any speeches, and he never apologized. But he didn't fight the decision either. Some said he looked smaller after it all, like a balloon slowly losing air. Others said he finally understood what had been buried too long. Sam Carter didn't boast. He didn't talk much about winning. He just went back to work, planting seeds, fixing fences, and caring for the land like he always had. Only now it was officially his. No more threats, no more fear. Ruthie walked the fields with him every afternoon, boots crunching on dry dirt. They planted tomatoes, squash and corn, just like her great-grandfather once did. I want to learn everything, she told him one day, wiping sweat from her forehead. Not just how to plant, but how to remember. Sam smiled. That's the most important part. One Saturday, the local school held a special event called Stories from Our Soil. Miss Ellis helped Ruthie put together a presentation about her family's history, complete with old photos, letters, and the DNA report. Ruthie stood in front of a room full of classmates, parents, and even some folks who'd once doubted her family. She told them about Josephine and Henry, about the promise that was hidden, and the land that had nearly been stolen. But more than that, she talked about love, work, and what it meant to keep going even when no one believed you. When she finished, there was silence, then clapping. Not loud or wild, just warm. Afterward, one of the boys in her class came up to her. I didn't know history could be like that, he said. Like, real people. Ruthie smiled. It always is. You just have to look close. Back at the farmhouse that evening, Ruthie sat on the porch with Sam. The sun dipped low, turning the sky orange and pink. Fireflies blinked across the yard. She looked at the fields stretching out in front of them, green, wide, and full of life. Grandpa, she asked. Yeah, baby? Do you think Josephine would be proud? Sam didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the land, his eyes shining. I think she's been walking beside us this whole time. Ruthie leaned against his shoulder.
I want to make sure her story, and ours, never gets lost again. Sam nodded. You will. That's why it happened this way. So someone like you could carry it forward. In the days that followed, Ruthie began writing it all down. Every letter, every photo, every word she could remember. Not for a grade, not for a prize, but for the people who came before, and the ones who'd come after. The land was theirs now, but the truth, that belonged to everyone. And it was finally, beautifully, free.